Well, thanks everybody for coming. So this is an activity of the Dog River Conservancy out of Norwich University, which grew out of the Center for Global Resilience and Security. This function is funded by a outreach and education small grant from the Lake Champlain Basin Program to the Dog River Conservancy. So today I've invited Curt Lindberg. He is the chair of the Waitsfield Conservation Commission. They're doing an amazing job managing knotweed in the Mad River Valley and serve as an example of what is possible if you are really organized and really well educated on this topic, and you've got a lot of great volunteers. So I thought it would be good to have Curt talk to the Dog River Valley community and start the conversation about how we might be able to adapt some of the things that Curt has learned to controlling knotweed in our own area. So I'd like to start with a question for you, Curt. Can you give us an idea of the size of the area that you're managing and how many people are involved in the removal efforts?
Yeah, okay. Well, first, thanks for having me here in Northfield. My son lives here, so it's fun to kind of hop over the ridge, come visit. In Waitsfield, we began really an intensive kind of knotweed management effort last year. And in town, we've been managing, I think, 81 different knotweed infestations in town. Some are small, like that, and some are, half an acre in size. So we've been dealing with a wide variety of sizes, and we've kind of prioritized sites using a set of criteria.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that gives us an idea about the types of sites, the size of the sites. You have quite a few that you're monitoring. Something that a lot of people are curious about is how many people it took to achieve the effort that you made last summer.
Well, there's about 25 community volunteers who have been involved in the effort. Some people have what we call adopt some knot. So they take on like season-long responsibility for a certain location. And it's usually a place they know or love or walk by, typically. So I think we've got about 8 of those in town. And then there's probably about 15 other volunteers who show up regularly. We have what's called Knot Thursday. So from 4 to 6, we say, okay, we're going to show up at the LaRue swim hole and go to town. So, plus last year we shared 5 interns from UVM, from their Rubenstein School. So they were employed by the towns of Warren and Waitsfield. And this coming season, we're going to have 8 interns, and Fayston is kind of joining the effort. So we'll have like a Mad River Valley wide effort addressing knotweed and also other invasive species.
That's great. Okay, let me look at my cheat sheet here, give you my next question. Okay, another thing that I know a lot of people are curious about is what methods are you using to control the knotweed? What methods are showing the most promise, and do certain methods work better in certain locations?
Right. So we're using all kind of manual methods. We're not using any chemical treatments at this time. So the main methods are regular cutting. So knotweed grows fast, so the idea is we will visit each site every 2 to 3 weeks and cut the knotweed back. When it's really growing fast, it'll grow a couple feet sometimes in 2 weeks. So every time you cut it, the plant has put a lot of effort into that growth, and you cut it, and then you're slowly depriving, the root system and the rhizomes of energy. So over time, the plants will weaken with that regular cutting method. In certain areas, we actually dig out the root balls and the rhizomes. The rhizomes can go up to 10, 12 feet in length. So that's a pretty intensive effort. So in special places, we will also dig that out. And in some of those areas, then we planted those with kind of native grass mix in those areas, and then we mow it or cut it, which does the same thing as the hand cutting. So every couple weeks, we'll be doing that mowing. In one location in town, we've done what's called smothering. So we'll cut down the knotweed, dig out as much as we can, and then put down cardboard and black plastic. And we're doing an experiment of that at the LaRue Swim Hole, which is a very popular place in town. The literature says if you leave that for about 5 years, the knotweed will have died by then. So we're gonna see. So.
Do you have to remove the material that you cut? Because, for example, one of the other invasives, which is goutweed, if you cut it, it can take off again.
Yeah, so the question was, do you have to remove the plant material after cutting?
What we do is we create what's called drying stacks, and we put some plastic down and then some boards underneath it, and then just stack the knotweed the stalks up on that. And then, in a month or so, they'll be dead. So they're not viable anymore. If you dig out roots and rhizomes, we also stack those in a separate area. We don't know how long they'll take to die, but it won't be in a season. So but the idea is to keep them, off of any contact with the soil.
Yeah, another question?
Yeah, what do you use for the cutting? Like a brush cutter, a scythe?
So right now, Curt is walking over. He's got some props in the room, so he'll bring them back and show you. The question was, what do you use for cutting the knotweed? What is your preferred implement of destruction?
A weeding sickle
Okay.
are really good. I mean, they will get through the stalk pretty readily. So we've found those. We were using hand clippers before, and these are much better.
Where do you get a weeding sickle?
Hardware stores, you can get them online, but they're called weeding sickles.
$15.
Yeah, exactly. We've also started to use weed whackers. So after we clear out the heavy growth, if we're just going back every couple of weeks and it's an area where you could use a weed whacker, we'll use that. Areas that are not close to water, you don't want to send any of the knotweed material into the water. So that's just another cutting method, which works in some areas. Other areas, like right along the river, we have knotweed and riprap, along the river. You're not going to use a weed whacker down there, so you're going to be pulling it or using something like this. So it really depends on the site,
And
which methods are most suitable.
In the riprap, did you just find that the weed whacker was running out of the string, or why was it bad?
Well,
in
because the riprap is like this,
Yeah.
it's hard to stand on there, and we don't want any of the knotweed stalk material going into the river.
Right.
Because that could just show up and create another little infestation downriver. And so, I mean, all we saw on, I think about, we keep really good track of all the different sites, when we visited, how long it took, to take care of the knotweed at those sites. And clearly over the summer season, you could see, evidence of the knotweed weakening. There would be smaller growth to kind of manage. So I think it was over 80% of the sites we managed, we saw real evidence of a weakening of the plant.
And how much time?
Well, it depends on the site. Some sites could take hours, some would take 10 minutes.
No,
Depends
I
on-
mean the weakening of the.
over the course of the summer. We kept track of the amount of time we would be at each site, and you could just see that time going down, and you would notice that the knotweed was weakened.
So the measure of the knotweed infestation that you're using is the amount of time it took to go back and remove it again the next week.
Right. And then in Warren, Warren's been at this for probably 3 or 4 years now. There are a number of infestations they've managed, especially the smaller ones, where they've eradicated the plant. There's just no evidence of growth anymore. There was a lot growing on like Lincoln Gap Road, and most of that is now gone. So we're hopeful that's what we see in Waitsfield.
We've got a couple more questions, I'm guessing, about method of removal, but I just wanted to say, if anybody has entered, Russ, I'm gonna pin you as my helper online. If anybody is putting messages in the chat, Russ, would you mind just interrupt and let me know so I can look and see what people are talking about on the Teams meeting? Thank you.
Over on that
Okay,
page,
yeah, I'll type.
got some
I'll try to
handouts,
keep-
not enough for everyone, but there's a description of each of those methods. We also put those up on signs and post them in very public places in town so people know what we're doing and why. So they've been a really good community education.
Thanks. Yeah, go ahead.
So I've got a couple questions. I've got quite an area along a brook bank of knotweed that I've been battling since I bought my property 4 years ago. And last year, well, 2 years ago, I used glyphosate. Last year I cut, and I cut with clippers because I tried something like that. Clippers worked better for me. I cut every single week. And honestly, I didn't see a reduction in growth. It took me an hour and a half after, the first cut. And it was just pretty horrible. And I've also got a section where I've tried smothering. However, at the very edge, it has wormed its way out. It's white because it's not getting any sun,
Right.
but it's still growing.
Right.
So,
Well, where you do smothering, you do have to manage your cut around it.
Yeah.
Because that's what will happen. You might try cutting less frequently. So let the plant put out more energy because that's a big effort. That takes a lot of nutrients for a plant to grow that much, that rapidly. So maybe try cutting we cut every 2 or 3 weeks.
okay.
Okay. Another question? Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to know, when you cut it, do you cut it to like this high? Do you cut it you try to cut it all the way to the ground?
We cut it mostly to the ground.
Okay, so as close as you can get to the ground. Okay, and the goal is to try to collect all of those pieces and dry them and not let anything hit the stream. That's the
Right,
goal.
yeah, keep that out of the water, yeah. When we started weed whacking, we were wondering, did we need to collect all the little cut-up material? And we've come to the conclusion that that's generally gonna be relatively small, and if they're in a flat area with some sun, just let it lie and it'll die. And we'll know if there's a problem because we're going back there, every 2 or 3 weeks. So we're trying to get more efficient, like over time.
So one thing that I've been concerned about is in doing something like that late in the season after the plant has gone to seed, is that if I leave anything at all behind that has gone to seed, that it'll reseed the next year. Is that a concern?
Well, we had that concern too, and we invited a couple invasive species ecologists to come visit with us last summer and look at our methods. And their view, which I think has some science background, is that the seeds are not viable this far north. So they weren't worried about the seeds at all.
Yeah.
So it's
So
mostly rhizomes.
It's the rhizomes, and along the river, when you have flood events, it breaks up the rhizomes, and then the plant slumps into the water. So the rhizomes especially, and some stalk plant material, can reroot downstream.
So I feel like I should probably jump in and give a disclaimer, both for the Waitsfield Conservation Commission and for the Lake Champlain Basin Program. We're not saying that the seeds can't grow. But it's a possibility that that is not as much of a concern as the plant material, and certainly, you know, the rhizomes are probably the biggest concern. Yeah.
So I've been battling our little lot for 4 years now, and this summer we did what you said the first year: cut the 7-foot stalks down with sickles, put them in black garbage bags, let them bake in the sun for weeks. And then the second year I planted mixed grass seed and tried to let that grow fairly high in between cuttings to try to drown out some of the little shoots. And this year, when I walk that lot, I'll pick maybe 5 to 15 little shoots that are less than 2 inches, and they're red. The chlorophyll hasn't even really had time to start building. So it does take a while, that's for sure. I don't think it takes a year, just a year or so to eradicate it. Is that right? It usually takes several years.
Yeah, and that's been the experience in Warren in the smaller locations. You know, the big, massive infestations along a river are probably going to be another story.
Yeah, so this kind of ties into another question that I had. I wrote down the big question that is probably on everyone's mind is it working? Would you say that you're beating the knotweed? Do you expect any of your sites to be knotweed free in the near future? And
Yeah. We have, the strategy we've used in knotweed in terms of prioritizing where to work was start up high first. You know, the knotweed got up there probably on gravel or fill, and the real risk is if it gets established in the higher elevations in the Mad River Valley, it'll then start spreading down on water and start lining the roads like it lines the Mad River. So we've prioritized working on those sites. They tend to be a little smaller. We've certainly stopped the spread of that knotweed. I can say that conclusively. And as I mentioned before, there's evidence that those plants are weakening. So we're hoping we see what Warren saw was, you know, with maybe 3 years of persistent attention, we can eradicate that knotweed. Along the river, we are managing several sites along the river, and those efforts are for 2 main reasons. One, for public education, because like at the LaRue swim hole and the Bridge Street area, you may know, there's a lot of people congregate there and visit there, and they're beloved parts of the Mad River Valley. So we're clearing the knotweed there to basically beautify, you know, so people can see the river again. You know, there was just like this wall of knotweed where you couldn't see this wonderful swim hole that people have been, you know, using for years and years. And the same at Bridge Street. So we're not, I think, pretending or expecting that we're going to eliminate knotweed along the Mad River. But I think we clearly can. I think we can stop the spread and eradicate some of the knotweed. And I'll tell you, the volunteers that have stuck with us for the season, I tell you, they are so proud of what they did. You know, they feel that they have made a difference in Waitsfield and for nature. You know, during the pandemic, I edited a book on saving biodiversity in Vermont. And in writing that book, I learned that E.O. Wilson, who's one of the most famous biologists of all time, he said invasive species are the second leading cause of biodiversity. The second leading cause after habitat. So people are realizing, hey, I can make a real contribution to making Waitsfield look better, but also a better home, you know, for all the, you know, critters and bugs and birds and other animals that kind of live in the valley. So they felt really good about what they did, and I think they're going to come back this year too.
Curt, what's the title of your book?
It's called Our Better Nature, Hopeful Excursions in Saving Biodiversity. I brought a few copies of it for you, and if anyone would be interested in taking a copy, that's fine. They're free. What I'd ask you to do, though, in exchange for the book, was do something with it. You know, organize a little book talk, share it with some neighbors, you know, do a front porch posting with it, you know. So the idea is to spread the word and encourage action. So.
Yeah, here in the
I
front.
have a comment and then a question. So I drive to Montpelier frequently, and on Route 12, there's a farm that many of you have seen. I think it's Berlin, but anyway, it's not in Northfield. And there's a guy there that has some goats, and these goats have wiped out a really big patch of knotweed, which I admire, and the thought, you know, what is that? You know, so I guess that's my observation. So it seems like it's working, and I was like, kind of want to go meet that guy and offer him a large sum of money to put his goats in my yard.
I actually have a student who also has goats, and I have him on the case. So
Okay.
he is
So I
doing a
guess that's
project
the question
about
is
goats and knotweed.
Are my eyes seeing it correctly, that goats can be good at killing?
It is. It's just a matter of managing goats is not easy. You need to move them around,
And
you
then
know.
it's in his yard, and
Yeah.
he has a very good bond with his goats, and it only works where he and his goats sit, it seems like.
Right,
So
yeah, but yeah,
I don't want to be a goat guy yet.
right.
It's like constant mowing. And they enjoy it.
Right, yeah.
Did you have a question?
Well, I just wanted to see if that was a viable
Goats, yeah.
solution. That's really I observed that, and then I was like, is that a good, that would actually work
Yeah.
pretty well?
Yeah, it would. And as I mentioned, the challenge is managing the goats and moving them around if you have to, so.
Yeah, and then a question there, and then we'll come up here.
And then it's not a question so much as an observation. When we've been over in Waitsfield, we see that you have a specific place for people when the volunteers, when they're cutting, there's a place for them to put the stalks and lay them
Right.
there. So that's put a sign up somewhere and say, put your stuff here.
Yeah, and then there's actually a little poster that describes the construction of what we call a drying stack.
Okay, yeah.
So,
Yeah, question here.
I have so much, and I don't even know where to start, but my name's Lisa Kolb. I work for Vermont Emergency Management, and we work in hazard mitigation. And one of the programs we manage is the Flood Resilient Communities Fund, which is funded with the ARPA dollars that came in through the state. And we have $8 million that we're trying to spend, and one of the things that we're looking for are conservation groups who would put in an application for removing invasive species and then riparian plantings. So when I saw that this was going on, and I live here in Northfield, we are looking for somebody to propose a goat project.
Yeah.
And I'm not even kidding, because our understanding is
I'll
it's...
propose one.
No, but yeah, see, you need to do a little bit more than that. But so in all of that, I'm saying that we're actually looking for groups that might be thinking about funding, and I don't even know what kind of funding you need, but we're looking from a planning perspective. If somebody wanted to do a scoping study in a community to see how would you arrange a large-scale eradication, we're looking at, like I said, we're looking for somebody that might apply, and we would help them fill out the application for funds in order to really think outside of the box with some of these ideas as a pilot program. Again, even if it can be a pilot program, even if they're utilizing what's already been done, because we also want to develop that, so in the future when this ARPA funding is spent, that we would have a model that we could use to apply for FEMA funding in hazard mitigation. So I say all that to say, and it doesn't have to just be that. If there's anybody in the conservation community who's looking for funding for special projects, or like education, we've funded some education programs in order to just pay for whatever you need to get the word out. So I throw that out, but also is there an amount of money that you could use to eradicate the knotweed alongside the Mad River with some ongoing maintenance?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. That I think would be helpful for a lot of groups. And now that you're into it, you kind of understand where funding would help above and beyond the volunteer efforts.
Right, well, yes, we in Waitsfield, the voters approved the creation of an invasive species reserve fund last year. And it's now part of the regular town budget, and that was $10,000. I think Warren has 20,000. Facein, I think, was going to use some of their ARPA funding. I think they're going to use $5,000 for that. We did, the three towns did put in an application for a grant from the Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife for an effort to expand our effort, and we weren't funded. So I'd be happy to share that application. And the purposes of it were to do an inventory, a good inventory of the location and prevalence of other invasive species in the Mad River Valley. So we've got some baseline information, and then we can start thinking about, well, what should we be tackling next and why, and what would the impact be? So that mapping, and then the major expense for us has been the interns from UVM. We pay them like $15 an hour. It was a great investment. They're all interested. They're either forestry majors or environmental science majors, so they really care about this stuff, and they brought a lot of energy, to town.
Yeah, and like I said, of course, as requirements, there has to be a flood reduction and a clean water benefit. But we, again, very excited about funding unique opportunities. That's the purpose of the fund. The fund is the things that FEMA won't let us do that we know need to be done.
Right.
And like I said, the application is very simple. It's a rolling deadline, and it's a potential of 100% funding.
So what should we Google when we want to find the request for proposals?
Well, we don't even have a request for a proposal. That's how simple it is. You can look under Vermont Emergency Management Flood Resilient Communities Fund, so FRCF. And I'll more than happy to hand my cards out afterwards. Like I said, the whole purpose I'm here is to hopefully work with our conservation groups. And it doesn't only have to be this type of project, but yeah, my boss, she's a state hazard mitigation officer, and when we drive around, she's like, knotweed, 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 knotweed. So this is definitely, and like I said, the goats, we've thought about if somebody wants to, you can hire goats. Mm-hmm. And we would love for somebody that might be willing to go with that.
Could we get a grant to hire goats?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And we could do that individually with that, like, would we have to be part of a club?
It has to be a nonprofit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And will it pay for material for riparian buffer? In other words, once you take out the knotweed, you can't just leave it be. You really need to encourage plantings.
Yes. And actually, like I said, even beyond that, we had the Newton School. One of our first projects we did is they just wanted money to plant trees. It did not have to do with the removal, and we funded that. So yes. And here's the other thing. Ye have not because ye ask not. So what we say is, I'm going to help you put together the application. The project review committee is some of the most wonderful people you'll meet in the state of Vermont. And they might have a suggestion, they might fund part and suggest something else with the other. We normally don't fund riprap, so as long as you're staying away from, and it has that flood reduction and clean water benefit.
Well, the plantings will help retain the soil in a flood, as well as provide habitat for the insect life that supports the fish.
Yep.
Life.
That makes sense.
Some people, there's a rumor that knotweed was actually brought to Vermont originally for erosion control purposes.
Apparently it was brought to the Philadelphia World's Fair. That's how it got introduced.
So I'm really impressed with what your organization has been able to do, developing this. What's a pretty impressive, holistic approach to management. If you haven't seen the report, everybody should send me an email if you didn't get the report, and I will send it to you. It's really impressive. You have obviously well-informed knotweed control practices, but you also have a detailed planning process, community outreach and education, and thorough record keeping that shows the hours that people have invested and the effect that effort has had on the knotweed. And so my question for you, Curt, is how did you learn to do all of this? Do you have a professional background in conservation biology?
No, not at all. I worked, and I still work in healthcare, and I've most of my professional life, I've been involved in organizing efforts to improve healthcare. So like collaborations like within a hospital or collaboration between hospitals and primary care practices to take on tough problems. So, and I have a doctoral degree in what's called complexity science, which is how complex systems like human systems, like a forest, like a riparian area, kind of all function. So I was kind of drew on those experiences about organizing things to get going on knotweed in Waitsfield. And so yeah, we had some pretty detailed plan. We used iNaturalist to map all the knotweed locations in town. So we've got a map, and that was very helpful in kind of telling the story about what we wanted to do and what we were trying to prevent from happening. And then we prioritized the locations, as I mentioned, and then there's some spreadsheets over there. You can see the kind of information we use to keep track of things. But I would say, the most important thing in addressing, a significant issue like this is to get the community involved. And so we did, lots of newspaper articles. We said, show up at the LaRue swim hole on a Saturday in May, and we're all gonna practice together. And we did that several times. And then we said, okay, if you wanna volunteer, put your hand up, and we're all gonna start working on, on Knot Thursdays together. And then we have a good local paper. They really followed what was going on. So we're not going to make much progress on invasive species unless a lot of people are involved, doing it on their own land, doing it on public land. So I think that's really a key. And then we had a starting plan. But because we had all these people involved, we're constantly talking with them. They bring their ideas. The local schools got involved. Can we learn about knotweed? They brought their parents. So there was lots of new ideas were generated because people were talking about this and what to do. So I think that was a real key. This kind of you can all kind of call it like emergent design of the process, and the ideas got better and better. So the idea of adopt some knot, we didn't have that idea going in, but someone said, I can't come on Thursdays because I run a bakery, and Thursday I'm really busy, but I walk my dog along Reed Road and I've noticed some knotweed there. I'll do that, right? So we found lots of ways for people to get involved. So I'd be really think about the organizing work that kind of goes into this.
Did you form a nonprofit or something like that?
No.
Do you intend to?
No. This was, done through the Waitsfield Conservation Commission. There's other organizations in the valley that help out. We've got the Friends of the Mad River and the Mad River Path. They help out recruiting volunteers. So it's become like a network of organizations. And then, as I mentioned, Warren and Fayston now, their conservation commissions and towns are actively involved. So if Northfield would like to join us, we'd be happy to share anything we've done. If any of you would like to come to one of our working sessions, we're having our first one tomorrow. But, you could give me your name and I could just send you emails, where we're going to be and what we're going to be doing, and we can kind of practice together. So.
Yeah, question?
I've got another process question.
Yeah.
And that's about what you do in between. So we're right along the Dog River, so we'd love to be able to deal with the knotweed along the river, not only just for the aesthetics of where we are, but also to prevent it from spreading. when we get it down, when we do the cut down, should we be putting some sort of like grass seed down? Should we be thinking about putting trees in there? Like, is there another piece besides just coming in every couple of weeks and trying to knock it down to the ground?
Well, what we've done, and we've kind of gone into this saying we have a lot to learn, so let's get some experiments going. So like at the LaRue swim hole, there's one area where we dug like crazy, right? And removed as much of the rhizomes as we could. That's where we planted, a conservation mix. And last fall, we put in some willow stalks, so we're gonna see how that does. So yeah, I think especially along the river, you need to be thinking about what else. Because, the problem with knotweed, it's got a very simple kind of root and rhizome structure. It doesn't hold soil very well. So having a mix of native species is what you want to aim for, because that will protect, from erosion into the water, and protect, the banks from collapsing all the time.
And a 25 to 50-foot riparian buffer also helps, particularly when you have high cover, also keeps the river cool.
Right.
What we're trying to do.
Right.
How do you dig the knotweed? Have you used machines?
No. We haven't taken on any sites that big, I guess. So picks and shovels and strong backs, right?
Yeah.
I've got a couple of things. One, when you cut the stalk, you wanna cut it flat. If you cut it at an angle, it will actually, you can puncture your shoe when you walk on it when it dries.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, it's really that hardy.
Another tip. If you know which sites you want to work on this season, go out now and clear all the dead stuff away. Because with the young stalks coming up through all the dead material, it is a jungle. So if you can clear out the dead stuff, then you can get at the new growth much easier. So that's why we're starting tomorrow.
I just did that yesterday off of your advice when we talked last week. I went to my adopted site and knocked down the old stuff.
It will pay dividends.
I've got two more, quickly. I've also heard, and I was working with a gentleman a couple of years ago who deals with keeping down the knotweed at King Arthur Flower and a couple of other places. Trying to crowd out and shade the area, he has found has worked very, very well. So like grow low sumac on a brook bank, that sort of thing is helpful. And the other thing, I had heard about goats too, and maybe that farmer, I don't know how old his goats are, but I had suggested that and looking to rent goats, and somebody had come back and said that it's actually harmful to the goat, and I looked it up and it did say that knotweed is not for goats. So
My hopes and
I
dreams.
don't know, I read it on the internet, so, there's that.
There's a science project here somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you can work with your highway department to prevent spread on roadside mowing.
So the question was, are you working with your highway department? Is that, sorry, did I cut you off?
Thank you for raising that. That's another important point. So, yes, we are working diligently to kind of collaborate with the road crew in town to help them understand how knotweed spreads. Because most of the spread we see on the upper elevations didn't get there naturally. We talk with them about their mowing schedule, and we know the locations where knotweed could be spread in the mowing, and we point those out and we monitor, after the mowing, just to make sure there isn't any spread. We also want to know from them, where will you be doing road work this year? So we can then scour that area for knotweed and let them know some areas they need to avoid. Or if they're going to work there, they need to dig it out really deeply, and then bury that material deeply someplace. We had a circumstance, it was, I think, 2 years ago, that led to a lot of spread along a road that leads into the Scragg Mountain Town Forest. There was some knotweed up there, but they did a lot of road work, and they, it effectively got spread all along the road. But we noticed it, so I think we're going to be able to eliminate that. Another nice consequence of collaborating with the road department, they were doing some work on a major road in town called Center Facein Road. We knew they were doing that. We knew there was a huge infestation of knotweed up there. And what they did was they graded all that up, put it in a huge pile, and then took that material away and buried it, and then planted a conservation mix. So that saved us a ton of time. And now we're just going to go back and doing the regular kind of maintenance of that site. So, and then we also talked with them where they secure gravel, because a lot of gravel can be infested with knotweed. So having them be alert to that, I think, is very important. So, but good question.
Other questions right now? Yeah.
Do you have a counterpart in Randolph? Because I actually came up from Randolph, because this was
I
a
don't
subject
know.
near and dear to my heart.
I don't know.
Not working.
But I think, the Conservation Commission would be a good place to start. I mean, some commissions are really active and very talented, and if, they could be a resource and partners for you.
So we're about 3/4 of the way through our meeting, and so my final question is, as Northfield gets started, or the Dog River Valley gets started thinking about how we're going to approach the idea of knotweed management, what should we prioritize? What advice do you have for us what do we need to do first and second and third?
Well, do what you're doing, right? I was surprised this many people showed up, which is a great sign. But I think you need to get organized. Are there 2 or 3 people who have some time and some passion about this? Could it be the Conservation Commission? I don't know. They have lots of priorities, but I think find some people or some groups that are ready to kind of be an organizing force for this, and then kind of start networking and find out who else might join you. I'd be talking to the select board about it because of the road crew issue, about potential funding issues, down the road.
Good news, we have a couple of select board members here.
Great. I would map the knotweed in town. It's all along the river. You don't have to map the river. What I would do is map it in all the other locations in town. And I think with that kind of picture, then you can have some really good conversations about where do we start. And it'll be hard in the beginning to know how much you can take on, because you're not going to know how much participation you're going to get, right? So we kind of started, we didn't know, and but as we got into it and people kept showing up, our vision of what we could take on kind of grew. And now we have a pretty good idea. Those people are going to come back. We sent an email out saying, here's the plans, here's the interns are going to be showing up this summer. We're going to be meeting tomorrow for our first Knot Thursday, and I got a ton of responses saying, I'll be there, I'm gonna take on the site I had last year, I'm going after that again this year, so I think it's gonna be sustained.
With the interns, was that year 2, or did you get interns your first year?
We got them the first year.
And how did you do that? Like, who was the we, and where did the money come from?
The money came from the 3 towns. In Waitsfield, it came from our Invasive Species Reserve Fund. We spent, I think, last summer, like $5,000 on the interns. They all came from UVM. UVM has a wonderful intern coordinator who lives in Northfield. Her name is Megan Young. She was a joy to work with. So she got the word out among the students at UVM. The students in the Rubenstein School need to do internships. So they get credit. They get college credit for this. So we work to make this a real learning experience for them too.
How many did you have?
We had 5 last year, and we're gonna have 8 this year, among the 3 towns.
Gosh, you could organize that in Norwich.
Might be able to.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
We actually talked about that a little bit
Yeah.
by email this last week.
Maybe Norwich would be willing to give the students free housing to stay in the summer and do,
Who knows?
I mean.
Depends on the funding.
It was the intern community member relationships that developed over the course of the summer were just a joy to see. I mean, the Waitsfield residents just really enjoyed working with the young people, and the college students got a kick out of seeing all this community energy, for the environment, which, they're going to school for this stuff.
Yep.
So that was a wonderful kind of collaboration. So, if you could find some college students.
There was another thing that you had mentioned in our conversations previous to this about folks that might have been new to town and maybe had moved to town during the pandemic and
Right.
kind of didn't really have many connections. And
Yeah. There was a
Tell us about that.
woman, Andrea Henderson. She showed up at our first, Knot Thursday. And she said, what is knotweed? What's it? She moved from New York City during the pandemic. And she said, I don't know nothing about invasive species, but I want to get involved in something in the community because I moved up here, I don't know anybody, and I want to get connected. And so she became actually our most reliable volunteer. She showed up every week, and she didn't even live in Waitsfield. She lives in Fayston. So now, this year, she's heading up the Fayston effort. So another example of this kind of emergence, just by getting people involved, sometimes some great things happen, so